For 8 years, the boy touched his ear. Every doctor said the same thing. Nothing we can do. His father, a man who could make people disappear with a phone call, spent millions. Seoul, New York, Geneva. The world's best specialists all shrugged. Then a maid from Lagos noticed something no one else did, and what she pulled from that child's ear will haunt you. Before we continue, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now. Tap the like icon. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And have you ever noticed something important that everyone else missed? I believe this story found you today for a reason. Maybe you're the person who sees what others overlook. Maybe you're the one brave enough to act when everyone else stays silent. This story is for you. Now let's continue. June Park was a ghost in the daylight. A billionaire on paper. Real estate mogul, tech investor, philanthropist. That's what the newspapers called him. But in the rooms that mattered, in the backstreets of Seoul where power actually lived, he was something else entirely. He ran one of South Korea's oldest and most sophisticated criminal syndicates. Money laundering, protection, influence peddling. His empire was built on fear and loyalty in equal measure. He had everything. A compound in Gangnam worth $50 million. Cars that cost more than houses. Security teams. Politicians in his pocket. But his son Miho was 8 years old and had never heard a sound. June tried everything. Asen Medical Center in Seoul, the best in Asia. Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. A specialist in Switzerland who charged $100,000 just for the consultation. They ran genetic tests, cochlear implant evaluations, experimental stem cell therapies. All of them said the same thing. Congenital sensory neural hearing loss. Bilateral. Profound. Irreversible. You need to accept this. Accept it. How could he accept that his boy would live in silence forever? How could he accept that Miho would never hear his father say, "I'm proud of you," or hear the sound of rain, or know what his own laugh sounded like? June couldn't accept it, because Miho was all he had left that was pure. His wife Yumi was still alive, still there in the mansion, but she'd become a ghost too. Something in her had broken when Miho was born deaf, and she'd retreated into prescription pills and charity galas, anything to avoid facing their son's silence. She blamed June, though she never said it. Blamed his bloodline, his sins, his darkness. Like God had marked their child as punishment. So June kept searching. Kept writing checks. Kept pulling strings, calling in favors, threatening when he had to. Somewhere out there, someone had the answer. He just had to find them. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the answer wasn't coming from a hospital. It was coming from a woman he'd hired to scrub his floors. Her name was Amina. And she was about to change everything. Amina Okafor arrived on a cold Monday morning in October. The gates of the park compound swung open automatically, and she stood there for a moment, staring up at the estate. It looked like something from a movie. Stone walls. Manicured gardens. Windows that gleamed like black mirrors. She clutched her worn purse tighter, and whispered a prayer under her breath. Back in Lagos, her mother was dying. Kidney failure. The dialysis treatments were draining what little money the family had. Amina's 2 younger brothers were still in school, still depending on the money she sent home every month. She'd left Nigeria 3 years ago, worked in Dubai for a while, then came to Seoul on a domestic worker visa. The jobs were hard, the pay was low, but it was better than nothing. This job, housemaid at a billionaire's estate, was the best opportunity she'd had. The salary was double what she'd been making. Enough to cover her mother's treatments and keep her brothers fed. She couldn't afford to mess this up. The head of staff, Mrs. Choi, met her at the entrance. A stern woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're Amina?" "Yes, ma'am." "You'll clean. You'll stay quiet. You'll keep to yourself. Mr. Park values discretion above all else. Do you understand what discretion means?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you?" "Because the last girl didn't. She asked too many questions. She was gone in 3 days." Mrs. Choi's gaze hardened. "This is not a normal household. There are things you will see and not speak about. Ever. Are we clear?" Amina swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Choi studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Follow me." As they walked through the mansion, Amina kept her eyes down, but she couldn't help noticing things. The silence, not peaceful, but suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath. The other staff members moved like shadows, communicating in whispers and hand gestures. Security cameras in every corner. Guards stationed at doorways, their faces blank, their hands never far from their waists. This wasn't just a rich man's house. This was a fortress. And then she saw him. A small boy sitting alone in a sunlit alcove off the main hall. He was arranging toy soldiers in perfect rows on the marble floor. He didn't look up when they passed. Didn't acknowledge anyone. His movements were careful, mechanical, like he'd learned to exist without expecting interaction. But what caught Amina's attention, what made her chest tighten, was the way he kept touching his right ear. Just briefly. A small wince crossing his face each time, like he was pressing on a bruise. Amina's steps slowed. "Don't," Mrs. Choi said sharply without even looking back. "Mom." The boy. "Don't stare. Don't approach him. Don't try to help." Mrs. Choi's voice was cold. "That's Mr. Park's son Miho. He's deaf. There's nothing anyone can do. The family has tried everything. Your job is to clean, not to interfere. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." But as Amina followed Mrs. Choi deeper into the mansion, she couldn't shake what she'd seen. The way the boy touched his ear. The wince. The pain. She'd seen that before. Back in Lagos, when her youngest brother had an ear infection that no one caught for weeks. He'd touched his ear just like that. Something whispered in the back of her mind. Something she couldn't ignore. Pay attention. Days passed. Amina cleaned floors, polished silverware, washed windows until her hands were raw. She kept her head down just like Mrs. Choi instructed. But she couldn't stop watching Miho. Every morning, the same routine. The boy would sit in the sunroom surrounded by puzzles and books he'd never hear read aloud. His world was small, contained, safe. The other staff avoided him. Not out of cruelty, but something worse. Indifference. Like his silence was contagious. Like acknowledging him meant acknowledging their own helplessness. But Amina saw something different. She saw a child who was desperately lonely. A boy who sat by windows and pressed his small hand against the glass, watching the gardeners work outside, watching life move without him. She saw the way he'd look at his father when June walked past without stopping. How his little shoulders would sink just a bit lower. And she saw how he touched his ear. Over and over. Always the right one. Always that same wince. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway near the sunroom, Amina paused. Miho was struggling with a jigsaw puzzle, frustration creasing his young face. A piece wouldn't fit. He tried again. Failed. His small hand flew to his ear, pressing hard, and his face twisted in pain. Amina's heart cracked. She remembered her brother Chitty at 5 years old, crying in the night, clutching his ear. Their mother had thought it was just a cold. But when the village doctor finally examined him, he'd found something, a seed. Chitty had stuck a tamarind seed in his ear weeks before, and it had swollen, infected, causing agony. The memory hit her like lightning. What if? No. She pushed the thought away. Specialists had examined Miho. Doctors who cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Surely they would have noticed. But the thought wouldn't leave. Upstairs, in the master wing, June Park stood at his bedroom window, watching his son through the glass below. Yumi sat on the bed behind him. Pills scattered on the nightstand, her eyes vacant. "He's getting worse," June said quietly. Yumi didn't respond. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you." Her voice was flat, distant. "What do you want me to say, June? That I'm sorry? That I wish things were different? I'm tired of wishing. He's our son. He's your punishment." The words came out cold, final. "You built an empire on blood. You think God doesn't notice? You think there's no price?" June's jaw tightened. They'd had this fight 100 times. It always ended the same way, with silence thicker than walls. He turned back to the window. Watched Miho sitting alone. 8 years old and trapped in a soundless world. All June's money, all his power, all his connections, worthless. He'd made men beg for their lives. He'd moved millions across borders. He'd toppled rivals and built dynasties. But he couldn't help his own son. The helplessness was suffocating. That evening, after the other staff had gone to their quarters, Amina found herself outside the sunroom. Miho was still there, building a tower with wooden blocks. Alone as always. She shouldn't interfere. Mrs. Choi's warning echoed in her mind. Don't try to help. But Amina had never been good at watching children suffer. She stepped inside quietly. Miho didn't notice her at first. She knelt a few feet away, pretending to dust the baseboards, but her eyes were on him. On that ear. The way he kept touching it. The way his fingers lingered there, pressing. And then she saw it. Just for a second. When Miho tilted his head toward the fading sunlight, something dark. Deep inside his ear canal. A shadow that didn't belong. Amina's breath caught. It wasn't a shadow. It was something in there. Something solid. Something that had been missed. Her hands trembled as she set down her cleaning cloth. She knew what she had to do. She knew the risk, losing this job, being sent home, her mother's treatments ending. But she also knew what it felt like to watch someone suffer when you had the power to help. Amina looked at Miho, at this small boy trapped in silence, and made her decision. Tomorrow she would act. Whatever the cost. Amina waited until evening, when June returned from whatever business kept him away all day. She found him in his study, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The room smelled of leather and smoke. She knocked softly on the open door. June looked up, irritation flashing across his face. What is it? Amina's heart hammered. Every instinct told her to turn around, apologize, leave. But she thought of Miho's face. That wince. That pain. Mr. Park, I need to speak with you about your son. His expression hardened immediately. Mrs. Choi handles household matters. Whatever you need. It's not about household matters, sir. Amina stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly. It's about Miho's ear. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. June set his glass down slowly. What did you say? His ear, sir. I've been watching him, and I think, she swallowed hard. I think there might be something inside. An obstruction. Something blocking. Get out. The words were quiet but lethal. Amina didn't move. Sir, please, if you would just let me. Get out. June stood, his voice rising. You've been here what, 2 weeks? And you think you know more than the specialists at Johns Hopkins? More than the doctors in Switzerland who've dedicated their entire lives to this. I'm not saying I know more, sir. I'm just saying I saw. You saw nothing. June's hand slammed on the desk. You're a maid. You clean floors. You don't diagnose medical conditions. Do you understand how insulting this is? How dare you come into my home and question? I had a brother, Amina said, her voice shaking but steady. He had something stuck in his ear. A seed. The doctors didn't find it at first either. He was in pain for weeks until. Your brother is not my son. June's face flushed with rage. My son has been examined by the best medical professionals on the planet. Genetic specialists. Audiologists. Neurologists. They've done scans, tests, procedures. And you think they all missed something that you spotted while dusting? Amina's eyes stung, but she held her ground. I'm just asking you to look, sir. Just once. Please. No. June's voice was ice. You're dismissed. Go back to your quarters. And if you mention this again to anyone, you'll be on a plane back to Nigeria by morning. Do I make myself clear? Amina nodded slowly, tears threatening to fall. Yes, sir. She turned and left, her legs barely carrying her. Alone in his study, June drained his whiskey and poured another. The audacity, the sheer arrogance of that woman. But as he stood there in the silence, something gnawed at him. A small, terrible whisper he couldn't quite silence. What if she's right? No. Impossible. He'd spent 8 years. Millions of dollars. The world's best doctors. They couldn't all be wrong. They couldn't all have missed something so simple. Could they? June walked to the window and looked out at the garden. In the distance he could see Miho's bedroom light. His son was up there, alone in his silent world, and June had no way to reach him. He thought about the maid's words. Something blocking. He thought about how Miho touched his ear. How he winced. Had any of the specialists actually looked inside? Really looked? Or had they just run their tests, seen the genetic markers, and stopped there? June's chest tightened. 8 years of specialists. 8 years of being told to accept it. 8 years of trusting a system that had given him nothing but false hope and empty promises. And now a maid, a woman with no credentials, no medical degree, nothing but her own eyes, was suggesting they'd all been wrong. Part of him wanted to believe her. Desperately wanted to believe that the answer could be that simple. That his son's silence wasn't permanent. That there was still hope. But the other part, the part that had survived in a world of lies and manipulation, knew better than to trust hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what got you killed. June set his glass down and made a decision. He would prove her wrong. He would have Miho examined one more time, by someone thorough, someone meticulous. And when they confirmed what every other doctor had said, he would fire that maid and never think about this conversation again. But even as he told himself this, even as he tried to convince himself it was certainty and not doubt driving him, June couldn't shake the image of his son's small hand touching his ear. Over and over and over. Wincing every single time. 3 days passed. June didn't schedule another examination. Amina watched him avoid his son. Watched the distance between them grow wider. And she watched Miho's pain worsen. The boy barely ate anymore. He'd sit with his food untouched, one hand pressed against his ear, tears streaming silently down his face. The other staff whispered about infections, about the boy getting sicker, but no one did anything. No one dared. Amina couldn't take it anymore. On Thursday evening, after the household had gone quiet, she made her decision. She'd watched medical videos on her phone during her breaks. Studied how to examine ear canals safely. She'd taken alcohol wipes from the first aid kit. Sterilized a small LED pen light and a pair of tweezers. Her hands shook as she gathered her supplies. This could destroy you, a voice whispered in her head. This could end everything. But another voice was louder. What if you're the only one who can help him? She found Miho in the sunroom, curled up on the couch, his small body trembling. When he saw her, something in his eyes broke her heart, a desperate, wordless plea. Amina knelt beside him and gently touched his shoulder. He flinched, then relaxed slightly. She pointed to his ear, then to herself, miming an examination. Asking permission. Miho stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Amina's breath caught. She pulled out the pen light, turning it on to show him. No surprises. No sudden movements. She let him see everything she was doing. Then carefully she tilted his head to the side and shone the light into his right ear canal. At first she saw nothing unusual. Just the normal pink tissue. But as she angled the light deeper, adjusting her position, she saw it. There. Deep inside. Something dark. Something that definitely didn't belong. Amina's pulse raced. She leaned closer. Her hand steady despite her terror. The mass was lodged far down the canal. So deep that a cursory examination would have missed it. It looked hardened, compacted. Dark brown, almost black. How long has this been there? She pulled back, her mind spinning. This wasn't genetic. This wasn't irreversible. This was a blockage. A physical obstruction that had been sitting in this child's ear for years, maybe since birth, slowly hardening, completely blocking his ear canal. Miho watched her, his eyes wide, hopeful. Amina's hands trembled as she sterilized the tweezers. She knew what she had to do. She knew the risk. If she hurt him, if something went wrong, she'd be arrested. Deported. Possibly worse, given who June Park really was. But she also knew that if she walked away now, Miho would continue suffering. And no one else would help him. She took a breath and whispered a prayer. God, guide my hands. Miho sat perfectly still as she positioned the tweezers. She worked slowly, carefully, using the pen light to see. The mass was compacted, stubborn. She had to be gentle. The ear canal was delicate, and one wrong move could rupture his eardrum. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her hands were surprisingly steady now, guided by something beyond herself. She gripped the edge of the mass and pulled. Gently. Slowly. It didn't budge. She tried again, applying slightly more pressure, adjusting the angle. And then movement. The mass shifted. Just a fraction. Amina's heart pounded. She maintained her grip, pulling with steady, controlled pressure. Suddenly it came free. The mass slid out of Miho's ear canal in one piece. A hardened, dark brown plug, compressed and waxy, nearly a centimeter long. Amina stared at it in shock. This had been blocking his hearing. Not genetics. Not some irreversible neurological condition. This simple, removable obstruction. She looked at Miho. His eyes were wide, his hand frozen halfway to his ear. And then something happened that made Amina's breath stop. Miho gasped. His head turned sharply toward the hallway where a clock was ticking. A sound he'd never heard before. His eyes went wider, filling with tears. His mouth opened. He touched his ear, the right one. And for the first time, there was no wince. No pain. Just shock. Pure. Overwhelming shock. And then Miho whispered something. One word. So quiet Amina almost missed it. Sori. Sound. Tears streamed down Amina's face as she realized what she'd just witnessed. After 8 years of silence, Miho could hear. But her relief lasted only seconds before fear crashed over her. She'd just performed a medical procedure without authority. On the son of one of Korea's most dangerous men. What had she done? Amina sat frozen, the hardened mass still pinched between the tweezers, watching Miho discover sound. The boy's head turned frantically, tracking noises she'd never thought about. The hum of the refrigerator in the distant kitchen, the rustle of curtains in the breeze, his own breathing. Each new sound made his eyes widen further, made fresh tears spill down his cheeks. He touched his ear again, gently this time wonderingly, and then he looked at Amina with something that shattered her completely. Gratitude. Pure. Overwhelming gratitude. Amina wanted to celebrate. Wanted to cry with joy. But terror had its claws in her chest. What do I do now? She couldn't hide this. Miho was hearing. Actually hearing. And soon everyone would know. Questions would be asked. Investigations would happen. And when they discovered that a maid with no medical training had performed a procedure, her hands shook as she wrapped the mass in tissue. Evidence. Proof of what had been stolen from this child for 8 years. She had 2 choices. Run or face it. Running meant abandoning Miho. Meant leaving him to explain alone what had happened. To deal with the confusion and chaos. It meant getting on a plane and never knowing if she'd helped or hurt him in the long run. Facing it meant standing before June Park and admitting what she'd done. It meant risking everything. Her job, her freedom, her ability to help her dying mother. Miho reached out and grabbed her hand. His grip was small, desperate. His mouth moved, trying to form words he'd never spoken aloud before. The sounds came out broken, uncertain. Thank you. Amina's decision crystallized in that moment. She would face it. She would tell the truth. Whatever happened to her, at least this child would have his hearing. At least she'd done the right thing. Come with me, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if he could understand speech yet. She gestured instead, standing and gently pulling him up. Miho followed her without hesitation. They found June in his study, paper spread across his desk, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in rapid Korean, his voice cold and commanding. When he saw them in the doorway, his eyes narrowed. He ended the call abruptly. What is this? Amina, I told you. Papa. The word was small, uncertain. Miho's voice cracked around it, unpracticed and fragile. But it was there. June's face went blank. The papers slipped from his hand, scattering across the floor. Papa. Miho said again, louder this time, tears streaming down his face. Papa, I can hear. June stood slowly, like a man in a dream. Or a nightmare. He stared at his son, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. That's not possible, he whispered. Miho, you can't. I can hear you. Miho's voice broke into sobs. Papa, I can hear you. June crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees, grabbing Miho's shoulders. Say that again. Say it again. I can hear you, Miho sobbed. I hear everything. The clock. The wind. Your voice. Papa, I hear your voice. June's hands trembled as he pulled his son against his chest. 8 years. 8 years of silence. And now his son was speaking. Was hearing. His eyes found Amina, still standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her hand clutching a tissue. What did you do? June's voice was barely audible. Amina stepped forward and carefully unwrapped the tissue, revealing the dark mass. This was in his ear, sir. Deep in the canal. It was blocking everything. I removed it. June stared at the obstruction. Something so small. So simple. Something that had stolen 8 years from his son. How long? His voice cracked. How long was that in there? I don't know, sir. Years maybe. Since birth, possibly. June's face twisted with something Amina couldn't name. Rage, grief, disbelief. All at once. He held Miho tighter, his shoulders shaking. Papa. Miho's small voice broke through. Papa, why are you crying? June pulled back, looking at his son's face, really seeing him for the first time. Because I can't hear you, he whispered. Miho, I can finally hear you. Father and son clung to each other, both sobbing, both broken open by a miracle they'd stopped believing in. And Amina stood there, watching the moment she'd given them, knowing that whatever came next, whether punishment or redemption, it had been worth it. Miho could hear. That was all that mattered. June didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every few minutes, he'd walk to Miho's room just to watch his son sleep, to see the peaceful expression on his face, the absence of pain for the first time in years. At dawn, he made the call. Dr. Kim Sang-woo was Korea's top pediatric ENT specialist. The man had examined Miho twice before, each time delivering the same verdict. Irreversible congenital hearing loss. He'd charged 20 million won per consultation. Mr. Park, it's 5 a.m. My office. 1 hour. Bring your equipment. June's voice left no room for negotiation. By 7 a.m., Dr. Kim was in June's private medical suite, his hands trembling slightly as he examined Miho. The boy sat perfectly still, wonder still written across his face every time someone spoke. Dr. Kim's expression shifted from annoyed to confused to utterly baffled. This is impossible, he muttered, peering into Miho's ear with his otoscope. The canal is completely clear. The eardrum looks healthy. There's no sign of the neural damage we documented. Because it was never neural damage, June said coldly. He held up the tissue containing the mass. It was this. Lodged in his ear canal. Blocking everything. Dr. Kim's face went pale as he examined the obstruction under magnification. The silence stretched for a full minute. This is cerumen impaction. Severe compacted earwax. Mixed with what appears to be vernix caseosa? Birth matter? His voice grew quieter. This would have formed during or shortly after birth and hardened over years. And you didn't see it. June's words were ice. 2 examinations. 40 million won. You didn't see it. Mr. Park, Dr. Kim's hands shook. This was lodged extremely deep. A standard otoscopic exam wouldn't necessarily detect complete blockage? June's voice rose. A maid saw it. A woman with no medical training saw what you missed. That's not. Dr. Kim stopped himself, his face crumbling. Mr. Park, I need to review my notes. The scans we did, they focused on neural pathways, genetic markers. We were looking for sensory neural causes, not conductive. You were looking for the most expensive answer. June stepped closer, his voice deadly quiet. Not the right one. The expensive one. Because that's what kept me coming back. Kept me paying. Dr. Kim's silence was answer enough. June called 3 more specialists that morning. Each one examined Miho. Each one confirmed the same thing. The obstruction had been the cause. Complete conductive hearing loss, easily reversible if anyone had bothered to look. The last specialist, Dr. Lee from Johns Hopkins, at least had the decency to look ashamed. Mr. Park, I reviewed the records from our examination 3 years ago. We did perform a basic otoscopic exam, but he trailed off, studying the mass under a microscope. This was impacted so deeply, and your son was so young, uncooperative during the exam. We should have sedated him for a thorough cleaning. We should have been more thorough. Why weren't you? June's voice was barely controlled rage. Dr. Lee met his eyes. Because the genetic tests showed markers consistent with hereditary hearing loss. We saw what we expected to see and stopped looking for other causes. It's a failure of thoroughness. Of assumption. Mr. Park, I'm deeply sorry. At least it was honest. At least it wasn't another excuse. By afternoon, June stood alone in his study, staring at the files spread across his desk. 8 years of medical records, genetic reports, brain scans, cochlear implant consultations. Millions of dollars spent on everything except the simplest examination. His phone rang. It was his attorney. Mr. Park, I've reviewed the medical malpractice implications. We have grounds for no lawsuits, June said quietly. Sir. No lawsuits. No investigations. Nothing. June's voice was hollow. What would be the point? My son can hear now. Money won't give me back those 8 years. He ended the call and walked to the window. Outside in the garden, he could see Miho playing, actually responding when the gardener spoke to him. The boy's laughter. June heard his son's laughter for the first time, and it broke something inside him. 8 years. 8 years of silence because doctors had been lazy, presumptuous, because they'd seen what they expected and stopped looking deeper. And a maid, a woman he'd almost fired, a woman he'd dismissed as ignorant, she'd cared enough to look, to really see his son. June's hands clenched into fists. His entire life, he'd trusted in systems. Money bought the best. Power opened doors. Influence guaranteed results. But money hadn't saved his son. A maid's compassion had. Everything he'd built his empire on, wealth, status, control, it had all been worthless when it mattered most. The realization was devastating. And somewhere in this house was a woman who'd risked everything to help a child she barely knew. A woman who'd seen what a dozen specialists had missed. June owed her more than he could ever repay. But first he owed her an apology. Amina spent the morning in her quarters waiting. She'd seen the cars arrive. Doctors, specialists, men in expensive suits. She'd heard the urgent conversations echoing through the hallways. She knew what was coming. Mrs. Choi appeared at her door just after noon. Her face unreadable. Mr. Park wants to see you. His office. Now. Amina nodded, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her. She'd made her peace with this. Whatever happened, Miho could hear. That was worth anything they could do to her. But when she reached June's office, it wasn't just him waiting. 2 security guards stood by the door. June sat behind his desk, his face a mask of stone. And next to him stood a man in a dark suit, sharp eyes, lawyer's briefcase, the kind of person who made problems disappear. Sit, June said. Amina sat, her back straight, her chin up. She wouldn't cower. Not now. The lawyer spoke first. Miss Okafor, I'm attorney Huang. I represent Mr. Park's interests. Do you understand that you performed a medical procedure without license or authority on a minor child? Yes, sir. Do you understand that regardless of outcome, this constitutes assault? Criminal negligence? That you could face deportation, criminal charges, possible imprisonment? Yes, sir. Her voice didn't waver. Attorney Huang glanced at June, who remained silent, his eyes fixed on Amina with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Mr. Park, the lawyer continued, given the circumstances, we have several options. We can report this to authorities, pursue charges, ensure she never works in. Why did you do it? June's voice cut through the lawyer's words like a blade. Amina met his gaze. Because he was in pain, sir. Because I saw something that could help, and no one else was looking. You had no right. No training. You could have damaged his eardrum, caused infection, made it worse. I know, sir. You could have told me. Insisted I take him to another doctor. I tried, sir. You dismissed me. You were going to fire me. June's jaw clenched. So you took matters into your own hands. Risked my son's health on your amateur judgment. Yes, sir. Amina's voice remained steady. And I would do it again. The room fell silent. June stood slowly, walked around the desk. The security guards tensed. Attorney Huang opened his mouth to speak, but June raised a hand, silencing him. You realize, June said quietly, standing before her, that with one phone call, I could make you disappear. You know what I am, what I'm capable of. Yes, sir. You're not afraid? Amina looked up at him, tears finally gathering in her eyes. I'm terrified, sir. But Miho can hear now. He spoke to you. He laughed. That matters more than what happens to me. June stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the guards. Detain her. Conference room. Don't let her leave. Sir. Attorney Huang started. Do it, June ordered. The guards moved forward. Amina stood without resistance, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. As they escorted her toward the door, she heard Miho's voice from somewhere in the house, calling for his father, the sound bright and clear and alive. She smiled through her tears. Whatever came next, she'd given that boy his voice. No one could take that away. In the conference room, Amina sat alone for what felt like hours. No clock, no windows, just silence and her racing thoughts. She thought about her mother in Lagos, about the treatments she'd no longer be able to afford, about her brothers who depended on her, about the life she was about to lose. But she also thought about Miho's face when he heard his father's voice for the first time. The pure joy, the miracle of it. Some things were worth the sacrifice. The door opened. June entered alone, closing it behind him. Amina stood, preparing for whatever judgment he'd decided. But what happened next, she never could have anticipated. June Park, one of South Korea's most feared men, a billionaire who commanded empires and controlled destinies, slowly sank to his knees before her. And when he spoke, his voice broke. Forgive me. Amina stared down at June Park, kneeling before her, and couldn't process what she was seeing. This man, who commanded armies of loyalty with a whisper, who'd built an empire on fear and power, was on his knees, trembling. Mr. Park, please. She reached out instinctively to help him up. No. His voice was raw. Don't. I don't deserve your kindness. I don't deserve anything from you. Tears streamed down his face. This man who never showed weakness, never showed emotion. His hands were clasped in front of him like he was praying, but his eyes were on her. You came to me, he said, his voice breaking. You saw my son suffering, and you tried to tell me. And I threatened you. I dismissed you. I called you ignorant. I almost destroyed the one person who could save him. Mr. Park. For 8 years, I threw money at the problem. Millions. I hired the best doctors, the most expensive specialists. I believed that wealth could fix anything. That power meant control. He laughed bitterly. And a woman who cleans my floors saw what they all missed. A woman I pay barely enough to survive saw my son. Really saw him, when I was too blind with arrogance to look. Amina's own tears fell now. You were trying to help him. You did everything you could. No. I did everything I thought I should do. I trusted the wrong people. I believed in the wrong things. June's hands shook. My son lived in silence for 8 years because I was too proud to listen. Because I thought credentials mattered more than compassion. Because I valued status over truth. He looked up at her, his face devastated. You risked everything for him. Your job. Your freedom. Your life. You knew what I could do to you, and you did it anyway. While I, his own father, was ready to fire you for caring. I just wanted to help him, Amina whispered. I know. June's voice cracked completely. That's what makes this so unbearable. You wanted nothing. Expected nothing. You just saw a child in pain and acted. With love. With courage. With everything I'd forgotten how to be. He lowered his head. Forgive me, please. Not as my employee. Not as someone I have power over. As one human being to another. Forgive me for my cruelty. For my blindness. For almost punishing you for being the answer to every prayer I've prayed for 8 years. Amina knelt down beside him, her hand touching his shoulder gently. Mr. Park, there's nothing to forgive. Miho can hear. That's all that matters. No. June looked at her, his eyes red. You matter. Your sacrifice matters. Your courage matters. He took a shuddering breath. I built my entire life on the wrong foundation. Money. Power. Control. And it gave me nothing when I needed it most. But you, a woman with nothing but a willing heart. You gave me my son back. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. With trembling hands, he placed it in hers. This is a bank transfer. $10 million. It's not payment. It's not enough. It could never be enough. But it's a start. Amina's eyes widened. Mr. Park, I can't. Your mother needs treatment. Your brothers need education. You need freedom from the fear of poverty that drove you here. June's voice was firm now, steadier. Let me do this. Let me prove that I've learned something from what you taught me. What I taught you. That real power isn't control. It's service. That real wealth isn't money. It's compassion. He stood, helping her to her feet. That miracles don't come from the people we think they should. They come from those willing to act when everyone else has given up. Amina stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say you'll forgive me. Say you'll let me try to be the kind of man my son deserves. The kind of man you showed me I should be. Fresh tears spilled down Amina's cheeks. She'd come to this mansion expecting nothing but a paycheck. She'd faced detention expecting punishment, deportation, possibly worse. And now she stood before a broken man being rebuilt by gratitude. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Mr. Park. Of course I forgive you. June's shoulders sagged with relief. He wiped his eyes roughly, trying to regain some composure, but failing. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you for everything. For seeing my son. For having the courage I lacked. For being the miracle we'd stopped believing in. Amina squeezed his hand. Miho was always worth believing in. I know that now. June's voice was quiet. Because of you, I know that now. 3 months later, the Park mansion felt different. The silence had lifted like morning fog, replaced by something the house had never known. Laughter. Miho's voice filled the hallways now, sometimes asking endless questions, sometimes singing off-key, sometimes just making noise for the pure joy of hearing himself. Speech therapy sessions happened twice a week, helping him catch up on 8 years of language development. His progress was remarkable. Papa, listen. Miho ran into June's study one afternoon, breathless with excitement. Listen to this. He proceeded to recite a poem he'd learned, stumbling over some words but beaming with pride. June set down his work and gave his son his full attention, something that had become routine. That was beautiful, Miho. Teacher says I'm getting better every day. You are. I'm so proud of you. Miho threw his arms around his father's neck, and June held him tight, still marveling at the miracle of hearing his son's heartbeat, his breathing, his whispered, I love you, Papa. Every single sound was a gift he'd never take for granted again. The change in Miho had catalyzed something unexpected. Yumi's return. She'd been distant for so long, drowning in pills and guilt and bitter resignation. But the day she heard Miho call her Yama, for the first time, something in her broke open. Now she sat with him during breakfast, teaching him new words, reading to him, making up for lost time. The coldness between her and June had begun to thaw. One evening, after putting Miho to bed, they stood together in the hallway, listening to their son's soft breathing. I blamed you, Yumi said quietly. For everything. His deafness. My pain. All of it. I know. I was wrong. She turned to him, her eyes wet. We were both drowning. Both too broken to see clearly. But now. Now we have a second chance, June finished. Yumi nodded. Because of her. Because Amina saw what we couldn't. Yes. June's voice was soft. Because of her. They stood in comfortable silence, something they hadn't shared in years, united by gratitude and hope and the sound of their son's peaceful sleep. Amina still worked at the mansion, but everything had changed. She wasn't just staff anymore, she was family. She ate meals with them, played with Miho, taught him songs from Nigeria that made him laugh. But June noticed she was preparing to leave. He found her in the garden one afternoon, packing her few belongings into a small suitcase. You're going. It wasn't a question. Amina turned, smiling gently. Yes, Mr. Park. The position is still open. Permanent. Whatever salary you want. Miho loves you. We all. He stopped, struggling with words. You belong here. No, sir. Amina's voice was kind but firm. My purpose here is fulfilled. Miho is thriving. Your family is healing. My mother's treatments are covered. My brothers are in university. You've given me more than I could ever repay. You could never repay? June laughed in disbelief. Amina, I'm the one who. I know what you think you owe me, Mr. Park. But the truth is, I came here for a job. I stayed because I saw a child who needed help. I did what anyone with a heart should do. She touched his arm gently. But this isn't my home. My home is in Lagos with my family. And now, because of your generosity, I can actually help them. I can build something there. June understood. It hurt, but he understood. You'll visit. Of course. Miho would never forgive me if I didn't. Neither would I. On her last evening, they gathered in the garden at sunset. June, Yumi, Miho, and Amina. The sky burned orange and pink, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Miho sat between Amina and his father, chattering happily about the birds he could hear singing, the wind in the trees, the distant sound of traffic from the city. Amina, he said suddenly, turning to her with serious eyes. Will you really come back? I promise, she said, taking his small hand. Every year. And you can call me anytime. Your father has my number. And you'll teach me more songs? All the songs you want. Miho smiled, satisfied, then turned to watch the sunset. After a moment he spoke again, his voice soft with wonder. Everything sounds so beautiful. June's throat tightened. He looked at Amina, this woman who'd arrived as a stranger and become their savior, and found her watching the sunset with tears on her cheeks. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. For seeing my son when I was blind. For having the courage I lacked. For changing our lives. Amina smiled. Thank you for letting me. For trusting me. For becoming the father Miho always needed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Miho's voice rang out clear and joyful, describing every color, every sound, every beautiful detail of the world he could finally experience. And June realized that this moment of peace and love and healing, was worth more than every dollar he'd ever made, every empire he'd ever built. Sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes they come from a humble heart willing to see what everyone else has missed. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they change everything. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's ever felt overlooked. Someone who's ever doubted their own voice. Someone who needs to remember that miracles don't always come from where we expect. Subscribe to this channel because I bring you stories like this every single week. Stories that remind us what truly matters. Stories that restore faith in humanity. Stories that prove one person's courage can change everything. And leave a comment. Tell me, what's something you noticed that everyone else missed? What's a time you acted when others stayed silent? Your story matters. I want to hear it. Here's my blessing for you today. May you have the eyes to see what others overlook. May you have the courage to act when fear tells you to stay silent. May you remember that your compassion, not your credentials, not your wealth, not your status, is your greatest power. And may you never underestimate the impact one act of kindness can have on someone's entire life. You are seen. You are valued. And your willingness to care, even when it costs you something, makes you exactly the kind of person this world desperately needs. God bless you. Until next time, keep seeing the invisible, keep speaking for the voiceless, and keep believing in miracles. Because sometimes you are the miracle someone's been praying for.